The year is 1475. Winter has turned the world into a graveyard of white and gray. Deep in the heart of the Lower Carpathians, a valley lies in total silence. It is a silence so heavy, so unnatural, that it presses against the ears like water. Into this silence walks a monster. It is not a beast of myth, but something far more terrifying. A column of soldiers stretching for miles, 120,000 men. The greatest war machine the medieval world has ever known. The Ottoman Empire is marching north. They are the conquerors of Constantinople, the breakers of kings, the storm that has swallowed half the world. They march with the absolute certainty of gods. They believe this valley is just a road. They believe the fog ahead is just weather. They are wrong. High above them, hidden in the tree line, frozen motionless against the bark of ancient oaks, 4,000 eyes are watching. They do not blink. They do not breathe. They are the ghosts of Moldavia, and they have been waiting for 3 days in the freezing cold for this exact moment. The Ottoman vanguard steps onto a frozen bridge. The wood groans, and suddenly the silence doesn't break. It shatters. The sound of a single war horn, deep and terrifying, followed immediately by the roar of cannon fire. The fog lights up with the flash of gunpowder. Arrows fall, not like rain, but like a solid wall of iron. The bridge snaps. The ice screams, and in one violent heartbeat, the hunter becomes the prey. This was not a battle. This was an execution. And the man who orchestrated it was about to teach the world a lesson it would never forget, that numbers mean nothing when the land itself wants you dead. To understand the magnitude of what happened in that frozen valley, we must first look at the shadow that was falling across the world. Europe in the late 15th century was a continent living in a state of suspended terror. If you looked to the map, you didn't see stability. You saw a tide rising. The Ottoman Empire was not merely expanding, it was consuming. Under the reign of Sultan Mehmed II, the man who had done the impossible and breached the walls of Constantinople, the empire had transformed into an unstoppable juggernaut. Their armies were disciplined, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. The Janissaries, their elite infantry, marched to the sound of met-hair bands that could be heard miles away, a psychological weapon designed to break the enemy's spirit before the first sword was even drawn. They had the best engineers, the largest cannons, and a treasury that seemed bottomless. Kingdoms that had stood for centuries melted away before them. Serbia, Bosnia, Greece, they fell like dominoes. To the sultans in Istanbul, Europe was a fractured puzzle of squabbling princes and weak kings. It was ripe for the taking. And the gateway to this prize, the key that would unlock the road to Poland, Hungary, and the rich heart of Central Europe, was a small, rugged principality known as Moldavia. Moldavia. Even the name sounded wild to the sophisticated courts of the West. It was a land of dense, primal forests, rolling hills, and river valleys that flooded with the seasons. It was not a wealthy land. It had no great stone cities like Rome or Paris. It had no vast fleets of trade ships. What it had was geography. It sat directly on the fault line between the Islamic East and the Christian West. For decades, Moldavia had existed on a razor's edge. It survived by paying tribute, protection money, to the Sublime Porte. It was a humiliating tax, a yearly reminder of who truly held the power. Gold, livestock, and respect flowed south to Istanbul, and in exchange, Moldavia was allowed to exist. But empires are like fires. They always need more fuel. By 1474, the demands from Istanbul had changed. They no longer just wanted gold. They wanted submission. They wanted the strategic Black Sea ports of Chilia and Chatate Alba. These weren't just harbors, they were the long-handed levies of children. He demanded that Moldavia cease its diplomatic relations with Hungary and Poland. It was the classic imperial strategy. Tighten the noose slowly, so the victim doesn't realize they are being strangled until it is too late. But the Sultan made a miscalculation. He looked at Moldavia and saw a small, insignificant buffer state. He looked at its ruler and saw a petty prince who would bow like all the others. He did not know Stephen. Stephen III, who history would later crown the Great, was not a man built for submission. He was a man carved from the same hard timber as his forests. He had come to the throne in a time of blood, fighting his way to power after his father was assassinated. He had spent his entire life watching the sharks circle his country. He was a realist. He knew mathematically that he could not defeat the Ottoman Empire. He could not march on Istanbul. He could not meet them in an open field with line infantry and hope to survive. Their cavalry outnumbered his 5-1. Their cannons could pulverize his wooden forts. But Stephen possessed a genius that few of his contemporaries understood. He understood asymmetry. When the Ottoman envoys arrived at his court in Suceava, demanding the increased tribute and the surrender of the ports, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The courtiers held their breath. To refuse was suicide. To accept was slavery. Stephen sat on his throne, his face unreadable. He listened to the demands. He listened to the threats veiled in diplomatic silk. And then he did the unthinkable. He refused. It was a quiet refusal. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply stopped paying. He sent the envoys back with nothing but the dust on their boots. It was an act of supreme defiance. It was a declaration of war against the greatest superpower on earth. In Istanbul, the reaction was immediate. This was not just an annoyance, it was an insult to the dignity of the Sultan. Mehmed II did not tolerate insults. He ordered one of his most trusted and brutal commanders, Süleyman Pasha, the Beglerbeg of Rumelia, to assemble an army. The orders were clear: crush Moldavia burn it to the root, bring Stephen back in chains, or bring back his head. This was not to be a raid. It was to be an erasure. Süleyman Pasha gathered a force of 120,000 men. It was a monstrous army. It included the feared Janissaries, the Sipahi cavalry, heavy artillery, and thousands of irregular troops known as Akinji, who were used to spread terror and chaos. As this Leviathan began to move north, crossing the Danube and flooding into the Balkans, the ground literally shook. Spies brought word to Stephen, "They are coming, and there are more of them than the trees in the forest." Stephen looked at his own forces. He had, at best, 40,000 men. Most were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, shepherds, and townsfolk. They were the small army, the Ostea Mika, and the great host, the Ostea Mare, which was essentially a mass mobilization of every able-bodied man who could hold a spear or a scythe. He had no heavy cavalry. He had very few cannons. But Stephen had two allies that the Ottomans could not bribe, kill, or intimidate. He had the winter, and he had the hunger. Stephen's strategy was brutal. It was a strategy of sacrifice. He knew that an army of 120,000 men is a beast with a massive appetite. It needs tons of food, fodder, and water every single day. If you feed the beast, it grows strong. If you starve it, it begins to die before it ever swings a sword. Stephen issued the order, "Scorched earth." It is a phrase we hear often in history, but pause for a moment to consider what it actually meant for the people of Moldavia. Stephen ordered his own people to burn their own homes. He ordered them to set fire to their own grain silos, the harvest they had worked all year to gather. He ordered them to poison their own wells with animal carcasses. Villages were emptied. Women, children, and the elderly were sent deep into the mountains and the fortified monasteries. The valleys were left desolate. When the Ottoman army crossed the Danube and entered Moldavia, they expected to find a land they could pillage. They expected to find villages full of livestock and cellars full of wine. Instead, they found a wasteland. The sky was black with the smoke of burning barns. The fields were ash. The wells were death traps. There was nothing to eat, nothing to steal, just the howling wind and the empty gray horizon. And then the winter truly arrived. It was January. The temperature plummeted. The Ottoman soldiers, many of whom were conscripted from the warmer provinces of the empire, were not ready for the Carpathian freeze. Their uniforms were too thin, their boots leaked. Frostbite began to take fingers and toes. Süleyman Pasha pushed them forward. He was arrogant. He believed that the sheer size of his army was a guarantee of victory. He believed Stephen was running away, terrified, fleeing into the mountains. He interpreted the empty villages not as a trap, but as a sign of cowardice. He was wrong. Stephen wasn't running. He was leading them. He was drawing them deeper and deeper into the funnel. He was pulling them away from their supply lines, stretching them out into a long, thin, vulnerable column. He was guiding them toward a specific point on the map he had chosen months ago, a valley near the town of Vaslui. The geography of Vaslui was crucial. It was a marshy valley where the Burlad River met the Rakova River. It was surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. The ground was boggy even in winter, and the narrowness of the valley meant that a massive army could not deploy its full width. They would be squeezed. Stephen arrived there first. He turned the valley into a kill box. The preparation at Vaslui was a masterpiece of military engineering. Stephen didn't just dig a few trenches, he reshaped the battlefield to ensure the enemy's destruction. He positioned his main force deep in the forest, invisible to anyone on the valley floor. He placed his limited artillery, about 20 cannons, on a hidden rise, camouflaged with branches and snow. He dug ditches across the likely path of the Ottoman cavalry and covered them with thin layers of timber and snow, creating invisible pits that would snap a horse's leg in an instant. But his most brilliant move was the psychological one. He placed his musical instruments, the buccium, the great war horns made of spruce bark, at widely different locations along the ridges. When blown, the sound would echo off the valley walls, making it impossible to tell where the army actually was. It would sound like they were everywhere. And then, he waited. The waiting is the hardest part of war. Imagine the Moldavian peasant soldier, shivering in the undergrowth. He is holding a rusty spear. He knows that marching toward him is an army that conquered the heirs of Rome. He knows that if he fails, his family in the mountains will be hunted down and enslaved. He is cold. He is terrified. But he looks to Stephen, and he sees a man of iron. Stephen rode among his men. He didn't promise them riches. He promised them their souls. He told them that this was not a fight for a king, but a fight for the cross, for their soil, for the right to exist. On the morning of January 10, 1475, the trap was set. Nature, it seemed, was on Stephen's side. A dense, heavy fog rolled into the valley. It was a pea souper, a fog so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. It dampened sound. It disoriented the senses. To Suleiman Pasha, the fog was a nuisance. To Stephen, it was a weapon. The Ottoman scouts reported that the valley ahead seemed clear. They couldn't see the trenches. They couldn't see the cannons. They couldn't see the 40,000 men holding their breath in the trees. Suleiman ordered the advance. The Ottoman column entered the valley. They were tired. They were hungry. The mud sucked at their boots. The horses struggled on the icy patches. They moved slowly, a sluggish river of men and steel. The visibility was near zero. Officers shouted orders that were swallowed by the mist. They were bunched together, shoulder to shoulder. Their numerical advantage now turned into a curse. In a tight valley, 120,000 men are not an army. They are a traffic jam. Stephen waited. He let the vanguard pass. He let the main body of the army enter the narrowest part of the choke point. He watched as they stepped onto the marshy ground that he knew would slow them down. He waited until the moment of maximum vulnerability. And then he gave the signal. It began with the horns. The bucciums roared from the darkness. The sound was unearthly. It echoed from the left, from the right, from behind. To the Ottomans, it sounded like the mountains themselves were screaming.
Panic rippled through the ranks. Where are they? How many are there? Then came the cannons. From the hidden rise, Stephen's artillery opened fire. At this close range, they didn't need to aim. The cannonballs tore through the dense formations of the Ottoman infantry. In the fog, the flashes of the guns looked like lightning strikes. The noise was deafening, amplified by the valley walls. The Ottomans tried to deploy, but they couldn't see. They couldn't form lines. They were bumping into each other, tripping over the dead, sliding in the mud. Then, the arrows. Moldavian archers, hidden in the tree line, unleashed a storm. They fired high, letting the arrows rain down into the mass of confusion. The Ottomans raised their shields, but they were being hit from sides they couldn't see. And then came the twist. Stephen had placed a specialized unit of secular infantry, fierce warriors from the mountains, in the center of the valley floor. Their job was to engage the Ottoman vanguard, fight briefly, and then break. It was a feigned retreat. The oldest trick in the book, but in the chaos of the fog, it worked perfectly. The settlers attacked, clashed with the Janissaries, and then turned and ran. The Ottomans, desperate for a victory, desperate to hit something solid, surged forward to chase them. They are breaking. The infidels are running. They chased the settlers right into the killing ground. They chased them into the marshes where the mud was deepest. They chased them into the range of the peasant militia, hiding in the reeds. Suddenly, the retreating Moldavians stopped. They turned. And from the woods on both flanks, the rest of Stephen's army poured out like a landslide. The battle descended into primal chaos. This was no longer warfare. It was a brawl in a dark room. The Moldavian peasant soldiers, armed with scythes and axes, knew this terrain. They knew where the hard ground was. The Ottomans, in their heavy armor, sank into the bog. Stephen launched his heavy cavalry. They didn't charge head-on. They slammed into the flanks of the disorganized Ottoman column. The impact was devastating. The Ottoman Sipahis, usually the masters of horse warfare, were trapped. Their horses couldn't maneuver. They were pulled from their saddles and dragged into the freezing water. Suleiman Pasha, in the rear, tried to send in reinforcements, but the bridge behind them was clogged with panicked men trying to flee. The bridge ahead was broken. The fog made it impossible to signal his commanders. He was the general of the greatest army on earth, and he was completely helpless. He could hear his army dying. The fighting was brutal and intimate. In the fog, you didn't see the enemy until they were an arm's length away. It was knife work, axe work. Men fought in the mud, slipping on ice and blood. The famed Janissaries fought bravely. They formed defensive circles, trying to hold back the tide, but they were fighting ghosts. Moldavians would strike from the mist and vanish again. Then, Stephen played his final card. He had held back his reserves, fresh troops. As the Ottoman energy flagged, as the cold and the fear sapped their strength, Stephen unleashed the final wave. He sounded the trumpets for a general charge. Every Moldavian, from the lowest peasant to the highest boyar, surged forward. The roar of their war cry shook the remaining leaves from the trees. The Ottoman morale, already cracked, finally shattered. It wasn't a retreat, it was a rout. Men threw down their weapons to run faster. They scrambled up the slippery slopes of the ravine, only to be cut down by waiting archers. They tried to cross the frozen river, but the ice, weakened by the vibrations of the cannons and the weight of thousands, gave way. Hundreds of men plunged into the freezing black water. The river became a tomb. Suleiman Pasha, realizing the catastrophe, turned his horse and fled. He left his army, his honor, and his ambition in the mud of Vaslui. The battle did not end when the sun went down. Stephen knew that a wounded snake is still dangerous. He knew that if he let them regroup, they would come back. For 3 days and 3 nights, the Moldavians hunted. They pursued the fleeing Ottomans all the way to the Danube. They harried them through the forests. The local villagers, whose homes had been burned by the invaders, now came out of the woods with pitchforks and clubs to take their revenge. The road to the Danube was lined with the debris of an empire: abandoned wagons, silk tents trampled in the mud, golden standards left rotting in the snow. The toll was staggering. The chronicles say that 40,000 Ottomans lay dead. 4 pashas were killed. 100 standards were captured. It was the greatest defeat the Ottomans had ever suffered at the hands of a Christian army.
When the news reached Istanbul, it was met with silence. For days, no one dared to tell the Sultan. When Mehmed finally heard the news, he refused to speak to anyone for a week. The invincible empire had been humbled by a prince of the mountains. But back in Vaslui, the scene was one of somber victory. Stefan rode through the battlefield. The fog had lifted, revealing the carnage. He did not cheer. He did not allow his men to loot until the dead were counted. He ordered a fast of 40 days on bread and water to thank God for the victory. He knew something that his celebrating soldiers did not know. He knew that this wasn't the end. The empire would return. They would come back with more men, more guns, more anger. This victory had bought them time, but it had not bought them peace. Stefan sat in his tent and wrote a letter. It was not a letter of boasting, but a letter of desperate urgency. He sent it to the Pope, to the kings of Hungary and Poland, to the Doge of Venice. In it he wrote the famous words, "Moldavia is the gate to Christendom." He told them that he had stopped the storm, but the clouds were gathering again. He asked for help. He asked for soldiers, for money, for unity. And do you know what Europe did? They cheered. They rang church bells in Rome. The Pope named Stephen Athleta Christi, champion of Christ. They praised his name in every court from London to Moscow. But they sent no soldiers. They sent no gold. Stefan was left alone. The champion of Christ stood on the ramparts of his fortress, looking south, knowing that when the snow melted, the war would begin again. And yet, that victory at Vaslui changed everything. It shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility. It proved that the juggernaut could be stopped. It gave hope to the oppressed nations of the Balkans. It delayed the Ottoman advance into Central Europe for decades. If Stefan had failed at Vaslui, there would have been no obstacle between the Ottomans and Vienna. The history of the entire Western world would have been written in a different script. In the end, the Battle of Vaslui is not just a story about tactics or terrain. It is a story about the triumph of the human spirit against impossible odds. It teaches us that there is no force so powerful that it cannot be broken by a will that refuses to bend. It teaches us that when you are fighting for your home, for your survival, even the fog and the ice become your brothers. Stefan the Great is still remembered in Romania today, not just as a king, but as a saint. The man who stood in the winter storm and held the line. The valley of Vaslui is quiet now. The mud has long since dried. The bones have turned to dust. But if you stand there in January, when the wind howls through the ridges and the fog rolls in off the river, you can almost hear it. The sound of the horns, the thunder of the cannons, and the silence of a waiting army that refused to die. History is filled with battles that are forgotten, buried under the weight of centuries. But some stories deserve to be dug up. Some stories need to be told, because they remind us of who we are. If you want to join us as we uncover more of history's greatest last stands, more of the forgotten heroes who changed the world from the shadows, then you know what to do. Strike that subscribe button like a Moldovan cannon. Turn on notifications so you never miss a mission. And tell me in the comments below, which other impossible victory should we cover next? Until next time, keep looking into the past. You never know what you might find hiding in the fog.